Welcome back to our Judges study. We're in Judges chapter 7. This is another part of the life of Gideon. Gideon, we've had several lessons on him. There's a lot in Judges about him. So we're starting in verse 13 today. Verse 13, remember, Gideon had been told by God that if he was still kind of doubtful, scared about being the leader, he should go down with his servant, sneak down in the middle of the night to the camp of the Midianites and Amalekites. So he does. And when he gets down there, then, verse 13 says, when Gideon came, behold, a man was telling a dream to his comrade. And he said, behold, I dreamed a dream. And behold, a cake of barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian, and it came to the tent, and it struck it so that it fell down and turned it upside down, and the tent lay flat. Isn't that amazing? So this is his dream. A loaf of bread, just a piece of bread came rolling down there and knocked down a tent. That'd be a pretty big piece of bread, wouldn't it? Okay. So now the thing about dreams in the Bible is they often have interpretations that we might not have thought of. Now, whether this guy actually has good interpretation or whether his fear is just getting to him, we don't know for sure. Yes, Julia.
It could also knock down the tent if the tent was not built very
well. Well, that's true. But we would assume that soldiers who camp a lot would have built a good tent. Okay, did anybody else have a question there? Okay, well, let's move on then. So then his friend answers him, and he says, this is no other than the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. God has given into his hand Midian and all the camp. So he says, here's the interpretation of your dream. That loaf of bread that you saw come knock our tent down, that's Gideon and Gideon's sword. And he's going to destroy us. He's going to take over all of Midian. God's going to help him. As soon as Gideon heard the telling of the dream and its interpretation, he worshipped. And he returned to the camp of Israel and said, arise, for the Lord has given the host of Midian into your hand. Now remember, he had whittled down from 32,000 all the way down to 300 men. So his army was not much of an army by this point. But he took those 300 men and he divided them into 3 companies. Verse 16 tells us. So 100 in each company. Then you get even smaller group. And he put trumpets in their hands and an empty jar with torches inside the jars. Now, what are you going to do with a trumpet and a torch and an empty jar that's hiding your torch? Does that sound like what most soldiers would take to battle? It's not. Abigail?
well. I always thought the jar would suffocate the torch.
Yeah, you would think maybe it would, huh? Well, I guess if it had some holes in it, maybe, or something to let some air in, it would be okay.
Or maybe it's a miracle.
Well, it could be. I mean, God does often perform miracles in the Old Testament, especially.
To show his power.
To show his power, that's right. Now, there's nothing here that indicates that this was a miracle. But they're blocking out. And it could be too. We a lot of times picture that they have the torch and they put the jar over it like this, but it could be that they had a hole in the jar from the bottom and they had the torch up in the jar like this, so that then the air from the top would be getting to it, but it just wouldn't be letting out the light. I mean, because it doesn't tell how they got the torches inside the jars. So that's something to consider. Sometimes when we read the Bible, we get something stuck in our head that this is the way it is. And we need to realize that if the Bible doesn't specify that exactly, then we need to realize there are other options. It could have been different than what I'm picturing it being. And that's good for us to do look at it from a different direction. Consider other alternatives. And questions will often help us to do that. So he says to them, look at me and do likewise. When I come to the outskirts of the camp, do as I do. When I blow the trumpet, I and all who are with me, then you blow your trumpets on every side of the camp and shout for the Lord and for Gideon. So he's sending these three groups to different sides of the camp, kind of like a triangle, three different sections. And he's the leader, so he's going to sound his trumpet. When he sounds his trumpet, everybody else is going to sound their trumpets. And they're going to shout for the Lord and for Gideon, for Yahweh and for Gideon. And so verse 19 tells us Gideon and the 100 men with him came to the outskirts of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch. So this is the middle of the night. They had just set the watch. And they blew the trumpets. Now, blowing the trumpets and yelling was just one part. There's one more thing they had to do. What was the next thing they had to do to make this work? Got to break those jars so that the light from the torch shows up. So now imagine you're Midian and you're down in this valley,
probably asleep,
sleeping, middle of the night, and you wake up to the sounds of trumpets from every direction. And you get out of your tent and look, and there's torches. You're surrounded. So that's where the fear comes in then. They're afraid when they see that. So they blow the trumpets, they smash the jars, they yell a sword for the Lord and for Gideon, and they held the torches in their left hand, the trumpets in the right hand, and every man stood in his place around the camp, and all the army ran. They cried out, and they fled. When they blew the 300 trumpets, the Lord set every man's sword against his comrade and against all the army. Now think about it. Remember, Gideon and his, they've got a torch in one hand, a trumpet in the other. They don't even have a weapon in their hand. There's not even a weapon involved here. But what happens is everybody in the camp panics. So they run and they start turning their swords against each other. They start thinking the other person is the enemy. They think the enemy's all around, so they just start striking out. Abigail, do you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I was gonna ask how they ran away if they were surrounded, but then
Yeah.
I guess they killed each other.
Yeah, they just started running. I mean, running around like a chicken with their head cut off. They're just panicking. They'd run this way and they run that. I can't go that way. I gotta go that way. And running back and forth and running around, and then running into other people who were also running and pulling their swords out and killing each other. Then, so it says now they weren't completely surrounded. Remember, Gideon's only got 300 men. He's got 100 men over here and 100 men over here and 100 men over here. So there's gaps. So they do start running, though, and they run away. And yes, Kazia, did you have a question?
Yes. If they all got killed, how would the last one be killed?
Well, they didn't all get killed. They were just fighting with each other. We'll keep reading and we'll see. They didn't all get killed right then because some of them did start to flee, and the army ran away as far as Beth Shittah toward Zerah. That one's a hard one to say. As far as the border of Abel Meholah by Tebath. So they did run away. They ran. But the men of Israel were called out from Naphtali and from Asher and from all Manasseh, and they chased after the Midianites. So the ones that survived the melee of fighting against yourselves, the ones that actually survived that and ran away, then the Israelites chased after them. Gideon sent messengers throughout all the hill country of Ephraim, saying, come down against the Midianites and capture the waters against them, as far as Beth-barah and also to the Jordan. So all the men of Ephraim were called out, and they captured the water as far as Beth-barah and also the Jordan. And they captured the two princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeb, and they killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb, and Zeb they killed at the winepress of Zeb. And then they pursued Midian, and they brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon across the Jordan. So they kept chasing them, and they hunted them down. Now, surely some of them probably did escape into the wilderness or whatever, but the Midianites are not going to be a threat to them again in Gideon's lifetime. So Gideon and his little army of 300 people with a lamp or a torch, a jar, and a trumpet have conquered Midian. What does this teach us about trusting in God and his plan? If you heard this plan, we're going to take 300 people and we're going to defeat so many soldiers that they look like the sands of the seashore. They're like locusts out there. Did this sound like 300 men with trumpets and torches? Does that sound like the way to win that battle to you? God's way is not always our way, is it? It's a different way of looking at things. And he has a plan, and he does things his way. And if we'll listen to him and obey him, we can help fulfill his plans. Okay, do we have any other questions or comments about this section about Gideon? We're going to still study more about Gideon again tomorrow. And of course, we'll type that one up. We won't video it, but we're videoing this one for Wednesday. Yes, Kazia, did you have another question? Is it?
Did you lose it?
No.
Well, what's your question?
Where did the princes live?
Well, they were Midianites, so they lived in the land of Midian. It was on the other side of the Jordan, but
Where did they work?
Where did they work?
I know that the last one you said
was
in
a wine press. Yeah.
In the wine
Well,
press.
I mean,
what's the other one?
Well, the other one, it was just a rock. They just killed him at a rock.
Just because it was named after
him
doesn't mean
they named it the Rock of Oreb because that's where they killed him.
Mm-hmm.
That's how it got its name. And the winepress of Zeb may not have belonged to Zeb beforehand. They may have called it the winepress of Zeb after they killed him there. Okay. Any other questions? All right. Well, we'll look forward to getting back to our study again tomorrow.